The deafening howl of wind rattled the wooden beams of the Placerville Mercantile as Madeline Russell clutched her basket of supplies to her chest, fear creeping up her spine like a winter chill. Through the dusty windows, she watched the sky darken to an unnatural shade of green, a color that every soul in California's gold country knew meant only one thing: trouble was coming, and it was coming fast. "Miss Russell, you best be heading home now," Mr. Gunderson, the elderly shopkeeper, warned as he hurriedly shut his ledger. "That sky ain't natural. Storm's brewing something fierce." Madeline nodded, her auburn hair falling loose from its pins as she hastened toward the door. "Thank you, Mr. Gunderson. I'll be quick about it." The year was 1873, and at 22 years of age, Madeline had already weathered more than her fair share of hardships. After losing her parents to typhoid 2 years prior, she'd been left to manage the modest Russell homestead 3 miles outside of town, where she grew vegetables and kept a few chickens that provided just enough eggs to trade for essentials. As she stepped onto the wooden sidewalk, the air felt heavy, almost suffocating. The streets of Placerville, usually bustling with miners, shopkeepers, and travelers, had emptied in anticipation of the coming storm. Only a few souls remained, hurrying to secure shutters and gather livestock. Madeline hitched up her skirts and quickened her pace. The wind was picking up, sending dust and debris skittering across the dirt road. Her wagon and horse waited at the hitching post, but the normally docile animal pawed nervously at the ground, sensing the atmospheric disturbance. "Easy, Belle," she murmured, setting her basket in the back before untying the reins. As she climbed onto the seat, she caught sight of a tall figure emerging from the saloon across the street. Kenton Stanton stood on the boardwalk, his lean frame silhouetted against the darkening sky. Even from this distance, Madeline recognized the most notorious cowboy in the county. Stories of his skill with horses were matched only by tales of his quick temper and quicker draw. He'd arrived in Placerville 6 months ago, taking work at the Carter Ranch while building a reputation as a man not to be crossed. Their eyes met briefly across the street. Madeline quickly looked away, snapping the reins to urge Belle forward. She had no business exchanging glances with men like Kenton Stanton. Men who carried danger in their shadows and heartbreak in their wake. The journey home was tense. Belle strained against the harness, increasingly agitated as the wind strengthened. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and Madeline prayed she'd reach the homestead before the full fury of the storm descended. She was still a mile out when the first fat raindrops began to fall, quickly transforming into a drenching downpour. The dirt road turned to mud beneath the wagon wheels, making progress increasingly difficult. Lightning split the sky, followed immediately by a crack of thunder that sent Belle rearing in terror. "Whoa! Steady, girl," Madeline cried, fighting to control the panicked animal. The wind howled with renewed vigor, and Madeline felt the wagon lift slightly on one side. With growing horror, she realized this was no ordinary storm. The swirling winds and unnatural sky, this was a tornado, a rare but devastating occurrence in these parts. Belle bolted, taking the wagon careening off the muddy road. Madeline pulled desperately on the reins, but the horse was beyond reason, driven by pure animal terror. The wagon bumped violently over the uneven ground, nearly throwing Madeline from her seat. A tremendous crack split the air as a tree branch came crashing down mere feet in front of them. Belle veered sharply. The wagon tilted precariously, and then Madeline was falling, tumbling through the air before hitting the sodden ground with a painful thud. Dazed and winded, she watched her horse and wagon disappear into the storm. Pain shot through her ankle when she tried to stand, and the wind nearly knocked her back down. The rain came in horizontal sheets now, soaking her to the skin within seconds. Through squinted eyes, Madeline spotted a dark shape in the near distance, the old Thornfield property, abandoned since its owners had moved east 2 years ago. If she could reach it, she might find shelter until the storm passed. Limping badly, she fought her way through the gale toward the dilapidated farmhouse. As she drew closer, she saw that most of the structure had collapsed, leaving only a portion of one wall standing. But beside it was something more promising, a root cellar, its slanted wooden doors still intact. With the last of her strength, Madeline pulled one of the heavy doors open and half fell down the earthen steps into the darkness below. The door slammed shut behind her, plunging her into blackness so complete it made her gasp. The cellar smelled of damp earth and rotting vegetables. Madeline felt her way along a rough stone wall, discovering an old shelf with what felt like a lantern and matches. Her hands trembled as she struck a match, and the small flame illuminated her refuge. The space was small but solid, with stone walls and a packed dirt floor. Old wooden shelves lined one wall, still holding a few forgotten jars and crocks. A wooden bench sat against another wall, and Madeline sank onto it gratefully, wincing at the pain in her ankle. Above her, the storm raged with increasing fury. The wooden doors rattled alarmingly, and dust sifted down from between the ceiling beams. Madeline wrapped her arms around herself, shivering in her wet clothes as she listened to the world coming apart outside. The lantern cast eerie shadows as she examined her injured ankle. It was swelling rapidly, and while she didn't think it was broken, walking any distance would be difficult. She was trapped here until the storm passed, assuming the cellar held. An hour crawled by, then another. The storm showed no signs of abating. If anything, it seemed to be growing stronger. The cellar doors shuddered violently with each gust, and Madeline began to fear they might tear away entirely, exposing her to the tornado's wrath. Then came a sound that froze her blood, a splintering crack, followed by a heavy thud directly above. Something had fallen on the cellar doors. She hurried to the stairs, pushing against the wooden barrier, but it wouldn't budge. The weight above had pinned the doors shut. Panic rose in her throat. The air in the cellar was growing stale, and the lantern's flame flickered, indicating the oxygen was depleting. She was trapped, with no one knowing where she was. The Russell homestead was isolated. No one would miss her until she failed to appear in town for Sunday services. 2 days from now. Madeline pounded on the doors, screaming for help, though she knew the storm would drown out her cries. She slumped against the stairs, tears of frustration mixing with the rainwater still dripping from her hair. The lantern flame guttered lower. Madeline carefully extinguished it to conserve what little air remained. In the darkness, she closed her eyes and prayed for the storm to pass, for someone to find her, for the strength to survive this latest trial. Miles away, Kenton Stanton struggled to control his stallion as he rode through the storm. After watching the Russell woman leave town, something had nagged at him: the distance to her homestead, the rapidly deteriorating weather. When the sky turned that sickening shade of green, he'd saddled up without fully understanding why he felt compelled to follow her. Kenton had seen tornadoes before, during his years working cattle drives in Kansas and Nebraska. He recognized the signs, knew the danger they posed to anyone caught unprepared. The decision to ride out had been impulsive, uncharacteristic for a man who prided himself on cold calculation. He'd nearly reached the main road to the Russell place when he spotted the abandoned wagon, half overturned in a ditch. The horse was gone, but the basket of supplies scattered across the muddy ground confirmed his fears. Somewhere out in this hellish storm was Madeline Russell, perhaps injured, certainly in danger. Kenton pulled his bandana over his nose and mouth, leaning low over his horse's neck as he continued forward. The wind threatened to unseat him with each powerful gust, and debris flew through the air like deadly missiles. In the distance, he could see the funnel cloud forming still miles away, but moving in this direction. He passed the old Thornfield place, almost missing it in the downpour. Something caught his eye, a flash of color against the mud. Dismounting, he discovered a woman's handkerchief snagged on a bush, its delicate embroidered mister barely visible through the grime. Kenton tied his horse securely to a remaining fence post and surveyed the collapsed farmhouse. If she'd sought shelter here, the prospects were grim. Then he noticed the root cellar, its doors now partially obscured by a fallen tree branch. Inside the dark cellar, Madeline heard something above the storm's roar, footsteps, heavy and purposeful. Hope surged within her, and she scrambled to her feet despite her injured ankle. "Help! I'm trapped down here," she shouted, pounding on the immovable door. Outside, Kenton paused. Had he heard a voice? He pressed his ear to the crack between the cellar doors. "Hello, is someone in there?" Madeline nearly wept with relief. "Yes, the door is blocked. I can't get out. Stand back," he called. "I'm going to try to move this branch." Kenton strained against the fallen limb, his muscles burning with the effort. It shifted slightly, but not enough. The wind howled around him, and in the distance, the funnel cloud was growing larger, its path bringing it ever closer. There was no time. Drawing his revolver, he fired at the hinges of one cellar door, the shots barely audible above the storm's cacophony. Then, holstering the weapon, he threw his shoulder against the weakened door once, twice, until it splintered inward. Madeline shielded her face from the falling debris, then looked up to see a tall figure silhouetted against the gray storm light. Rain poured in around him as he descended the steps, and recognition dawned as he came into view. "Mr. Stanton." Kenton reached her side, quickly assessing her condition. "Are you hurt?" "My ankle," she admitted. "I can walk, but not quickly." "No time for walking," he said grimly. Without further explanation, he scooped her into his arms and carried her up the stairs. Outside, the world had transformed into a nightmarish landscape. The wind shrieked with almost human voices, and the rain fell so heavily it was difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. Kenton set Madeline down beside his horse, shouting to be heard over the storm. "Tornadoes coming. We need to find better shelter." Madeline looked around desperately. The storm cellar was the safest place. Not with that tree crushing it. One good hit from the tornado and the whole thing could collapse. He pointed toward a ravine about 50 yards away. "There, low ground away from trees. It's our best chance." He helped her onto his horse, then mounted behind her, one arm securely around her waist as he guided the reluctant animal toward the ravine. The wind fought them every step of the way, and Madeline clutched the saddle horn, terrified of being blown away. They had almost reached the ravine when Madeline looked back and gasped. The funnel cloud had touched down, its massive form churning across the landscape less than a half-mile away. The roar was deafening now, like 1,000 freight trains bearing down on them. Kenton didn't waste time looking. He urged his horse down into the ravine, dismounted in one fluid motion, and pulled Madeline down after him. Leading the horse to the deepest part of the depression, he pressed Madeline against the earthen wall, covering her body with his own as the tornado approached. "Keep your head down," he shouted, his mouth close to her ear. Madeline buried her face against his chest, her fingers digging into his soaked coat. She could feel his heartbeat, rapid but steady, even as the world seemed to come apart around them. The sound became unbearable, a physical pressure against their eardrums. Debris rained down branches, boards, objects torn from homes and farms. Kenton's body jerked as something struck his back, but he maintained his protective position over her. For what seemed like an eternity, they remained locked together as the tornado passed nearby. The horse whinnied in terror but stayed put, pressed against the ravine wall by Kenton's firm grip on its reins. Then, gradually, the roar began to recede. The wind still howled, but the worst had passed them by. Madeline raised her head cautiously, meeting Kenton's gaze. His face was inches from hers, rain streaming down his features, his eyes an intense blue she hadn't noticed before. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice hoarse. She nodded, suddenly acutely aware of their closeness, of his arm still wrapped protectively around her waist. "You're hurt," she said, noticing a thin line of blood trickling from a cut on his temple. "It's nothing." He straightened, wincing slightly, and helped her to her feet. "We need to get to proper shelter. That was just the first tornado. There could be more." The landscape around them was transformed, trees uprooted, debris scattered everywhere. In the distance, they could see the funnel cloud continuing its destructive path, now moving away from them. "My home," Madeline said, fear gripping her heart. "It's in that direction." Kenton's expression was grim. "We can't make it there now. The roads will be impassable, and there could be more storms coming." He looked around, orienting himself. "The Miller place is closest, maybe a mile south. Old Tom Miller built that house solid as a fortress." "But Mr. Miller died last winter," Madeline said. "The property's been empty since." "Empty is fine. We just need walls and a roof." He helped her onto the horse again. "Can you ride if I lead?" She nodded, settling into the saddle and gritting her teeth against the pain in her ankle. Kenton took the reins and began leading the horse up out of the ravine, navigating carefully around fallen debris. The journey to the Miller property was arduous. The storm had subsided to a steady rain, but the ground was a treacherous mix of mud and scattered debris. Kenton moved with purpose, occasionally stopping to help his horse navigate particularly difficult stretches. Madeline watched him, struck by the careful way he handled the animal, murmuring reassurances when it balked at obstacles. The Miller homestead came into view, a sturdy two-story farmhouse with a wide porch and stone foundation. Remarkably, it appeared largely untouched by the tornado, though several outbuildings had been damaged and the barn door hung askew. Kenton helped Madeline dismount, supporting her weight as she tested her injured ankle. "Lean on me," he said, and she did, acutely aware of his solid presence beside her as they made their way to the porch. The front door was locked, but Kenton didn't hesitate. "Forgive the intrusion, Tom," he muttered, before driving his boot against the door beside the lock. The wood splintered on the second kick, and the door swung inward. The interior was dark and musty, the furniture draped with sheets to protect it from dust. Kenton helped Madeline to a chair in what appeared to be the parlor, then set about lighting a lamp he found on a side table. In the warm glow, the room took shape: simple but comfortable furnishings, a stone fireplace, shelves lined with books. "We need to get you dry," Kenton said, eyeing her sodden dress with concern. "And I should look at that ankle." Madeline felt a flush rise to her cheeks. "I'll be fine, Mr. Stanton. You've done more than enough already." "Kenton," he corrected, shrugging out of his wet coat. "After facing a tornado together, I reckon we can dispense with formalities." He moved to the fireplace, checking the chimney before starting to build a fire with wood from a nearby basket. Madeline watched him work, taking the opportunity to study him properly for the first time. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 28 or 30, with dark hair that curled slightly where it touched his collar. His face was tanned from outdoor work, with lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled more than his reputation indicated. His hands, she noticed, were strong but careful as he arranged kindling. Soon, a small fire crackled in the hearth, casting much-needed warmth into the room. Kenton disappeared upstairs, returning minutes later with a stack of folded linens and clothing. "Found these in a bedroom," he explained. "Looks like Mrs. Miller left some things behind. They might be a bit large, but they're dry." He placed the stack beside her, then turned his back politely. "I'll check the kitchen while you change." Madeline waited until he left the room, then quickly stripped off her sodden dress and petticoats. The simple cotton dress she found in the pile was indeed too large, but blessedly dry. She used a length of ribbon from her own dress to cinch the waist, making it somewhat presentable. "Mr. Stanton Kenton," she called when she was decent, "you should change as well. You'll catch your death otherwise." He returned, carrying a kettle of water he'd found and placed on the fire. "Found some of Tom's old clothes upstairs. I'll change in a minute." He knelt beside her chair. "First, let me see that ankle." Before she could protest, he gently lifted her injured foot onto a footstool, carefully rolling down her stocking to reveal the swollen ankle beneath. His touch was surprisingly gentle as he examined the injury, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Not broken, I don't think," he pronounced. "But a bad sprain. You need cold water and bandages, then to keep it elevated." He looked up at her, and something in his expression made her heart beat faster. "You were lucky. If you'd been caught outside when that tornado hit. If you hadn't come looking for me, I would have suffocated in that cellar," she said softly. "Why did you follow me, Mr. Kenton?" He sat back on his heels, seemingly considering the question. "I saw you leaving town as the storm was brewing. Something didn't sit right." "I've seen what tornadoes can do," he shrugged as if embarrassed by his concern. "Just seemed like the decent thing to do." Madeline sensed there was more to it but didn't press. "Well, I'm grateful, truly," he nodded, rising to his feet. "I'll fetch some cold water for that ankle, then see about finding us something to eat. Tom always kept a well-stocked pantry." While he was gone, Madeline took stock of their situation. The storm continued outside, rain lashing against the windows, but the immediate danger had passed. They were safe, dry, and sheltered. But they were also alone, unchaperoned in circumstances that would raise eyebrows throughout Placerville if known. Her reputation, already somewhat precarious as a single woman living alone, would be in tatters. Yet as Kenton returned with a basin of water and strips torn from a clean pillowcase, she found it difficult to care about societal expectations. This man had risked his life to save hers. Whatever his reputation in town, his actions today revealed his true character. "This will be cold," he warned, carefully lowering her ankle into the water. The chill made her gasp, but the relief was immediate. As he worked, wrapping her ankle with practiced efficiency, Madeline studied his downturned face. "You've done this before," she observed. "Spent time as a ranch hand in Wyoming," he explained. "When you're 2 days' ride from the nearest doctor, you learn to handle injuries." He secured the bandage with a neat knot. "That should help with the swelling. Try to keep it elevated." He rose and moved to the window, peering out at the darkening landscape. "We'll have to stay the night. Roads won't be passable until tomorrow at the earliest." Madeline nodded, accepting the inevitable. "My neighbors will worry. Nothing to be done about it now." He turned back to her. "I'll check on the horse, then see about supper." Left alone again, Madeline adjusted her position to better elevate her injured ankle. Despite the circumstances, a curious sense of peace settled over her. Perhaps it was the aftermath of danger past, or simply exhaustion. But in this moment, stranded with the most notorious cowboy in the county, she felt strangely safe. Kenton returned shortly, his hair damp from the rain but dressed now in dry clothing, a simple flannel shirt and trousers that hung slightly loose on his frame. He carried a wooden tray laden with an assortment of preserves, hardtack, and dried beef. "Not exactly a feast," he apologized, setting the tray on a small table beside her. "But it'll keep us going." They ate in companionable silence, the crackling fire and drumming rain the only sounds. As darkness fell completely outside, the lamplight created a small circle of warmth that seemed to separate them from the chaos of the day. "Tell me about yourself, Miss Russell," Kenton said finally, settling back in his chair. "I've seen you in town, but we've never properly spoken." "Madeline, please," she corrected, mirroring his earlier request for informality. "There's not much to tell. I've lived in Placerville my whole life. My parents came west during the gold rush of '49, though they were merchants, not miners." She paused, the familiar pang of loss surfacing briefly. "They passed 2 years ago, typhoid." "I'm sorry," he said, and the simple sincerity in his voice touched her. "The homestead is mine now. It's not much, but it's home." She hesitated, then added, "And you, the stories about you in Placerville are quite varied." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I imagine they are. Small towns love their tall tales." He stretched his long legs toward the fire. "I was born in Missouri, left home at 16, worked my way west. Cattle drives, ranch work, a bit of prospecting, nothing that panned out." His expression turned thoughtful. "Drifted more than I should have, perhaps. And what brought you to Placerville?" she asked. "Honest work," he said simply. "The Carter spread needed hands. I needed somewhere to winter." He met her gaze directly. "Despite what you might have heard, I'm not running from the law or nursing a broken heart. Just a man trying to make his way." There was something refreshing about his directness. "The ladies at the church social seem quite taken with the mysterious Mr. Stanton," she said, a hint of teasing in her voice. He laughed, the sound unexpectedly warm. "Is that so? Perhaps I should attend services more regularly." "Perhaps you should," she agreed, surprised by the ease of their conversation. As the evening progressed, they continued talking, sharing stories and observations. Madeline learned that Kenton had a younger brother in St. Louis, that he could read and write better than most thanks to a schoolteacher mother, and that he had a particular fondness for apple pie. In turn, she told him about her garden, her hopes of expanding her chicken flock, and her passion for the novels she ordered from San Francisco whenever she could afford them. "Jane Austen?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "I wouldn't have guessed." "You know her work?" Madeline asked, surprised. "My mother's influence," he admitted. "She believed education shouldn't stop at the schoolhouse door, made me and my brother read everything she could get her hands on." The fire burned low, and despite their circumstances, Madeline felt her eyelids growing heavy. Kenton noticed her stifling a yawn. "You should rest," he said gently. "Take the sofa, I'll keep watch." "You need sleep too," she protested. "I'll manage. Used to standing night watch on the trail." He rose and added more wood to the fire. "Sleep, Madeline. Tomorrow we'll see about getting you home." She wanted to argue further but couldn't deny her exhaustion. Kenton helped her to the sofa, arranging pillows beneath her injured ankle and covering her with a quilt he'd found upstairs. "Thank you," she murmured, already half asleep, "for everything." His hand brushed her hair lightly, so briefly she might have imagined it. "Rest now." Madeline drifted off to the sound of rain against the windows and Kenton's quiet movements as he settled into a chair nearby, a silent guardian against the night. She woke to sunlight streaming through the windows and the smell of coffee. For a moment, she was disoriented, then the events of the previous day came rushing back. Sitting up cautiously, she found Kenton by the window, looking out at the rain-washed landscape. "Good morning," she said, her voice still thick with sleep. He turned, and the smile that greeted her was warmer than she expected. "Good morning. How's the ankle?" Madeline gingerly tested it, pleased to find the pain had subsided to a dull ache. "Better, I think. Still tender, but I can put weight on it." "Good. I've made coffee, such as it is. Found a tin in the kitchen. It's a bit stale, but hot." She accepted the cup he offered, their fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. The coffee was indeed stale, but the warmth was welcome. Through the windows, she could see the storm had passed, leaving behind a clear blue sky and considerable destruction. "It's bad out there," Kenton said, following her gaze. "Trees down everywhere. I checked around at first light. The tornado cut a path about a quarter-mile wide, heading northeast." "My home," Madeline said, anxiety flooding back. "We'll head there as soon as you're ready," he promised. "The roads are a mess, but we can make it on horseback." They ate a sparse breakfast of more hardtack and preserves, then prepared to leave. Kenton helped Madeline bind her ankle tightly for the journey, his hands capable and sure. She had managed to mostly dry her original dress by the fire, and though it was wrinkled and mud-stained, it was preferable to traveling in Mrs. Miller's oversized clothing. Outside, the world had been transformed. Trees lay uprooted, debris scattered across the yard. The barn had lost part of its roof, but miraculously, the house had sustained only minor damage. Kenton's horse, sheltered in what remained of the barn, greeted them with a soft nicker. "Good boy, Samson," Kenton murmured, checking the animal for any injuries before saddling him. Ready for another journey, he helped Madeline mount, then swung up behind her as he had the day before. The proximity was less urgent now, but no less affecting. She was acutely aware of his chest against her back, his arm secure around her waist as they set off toward the Russell homestead. The journey was slow going. The tornado had left a swath of destruction across the countryside, felled trees, scattered debris, even a wagon overturned in the middle of what had once been the road. Kenton navigated carefully, sometimes dismounting to clear a path or guide Samson around particularly treacherous areas. As they crested a small rise, Madeline's homestead came into view in the valley below. She held her breath, scanning the familiar landscape for damage. The main house appeared intact, though the small barn had sustained damage, its roof partially collapsed. Her chicken coop had vanished entirely, and the vegetated garden was a muddy ruin. "Could have been worse," Kenton observed, feeling her tense in front of him. "Main house looks solid. The rest can be rebuilt." Tears stung Madeline's eyes, not from sorrow, but from relief and a sudden, overwhelming gratitude. "Yes," she agreed softly, "it can be rebuilt." They rode down to the house, where Kenton helped her dismount. Testing her injured ankle cautiously, Madeline found she could walk with only a slight limp. Together, they approached the porch. The house had indeed weathered the storm remarkably well. A few shingles had torn loose, and the front steps were strewn with branches and debris, but the structure itself was sound. Inside, they found evidence of the storm's fury. A broken window had allowed rain to soak one corner of the parlor, and the chimney had sent soot billowing into the kitchen, but nothing that couldn't be cleaned or repaired. "You were fortunate," Kenton said, examining the broken window. "I can fix this for you before I go." Madeline was checking her pantry, relieved to find her stored food undamaged. "I can't ask you to do that. You've already done so much. You're not asking. I'm offering." His tone brooked no argument. "Besides, with that ankle, you shouldn't be climbing around with tools and glass." She conceded the point, watching as he set about gathering what he needed for the repair. There was something comforting about his presence in her home, his quiet competence as he worked. The day passed in a flurry of cleanup and minor repairs. Kenton fixed the broken window, secured a loose shutter, and even ventured to the damaged barn to salvage what he could. Madeline, despite her ankle, managed to clean the soot from the kitchen and set the interior of the house to rights. By late afternoon, exhaustion began to take its toll. Madeline had prepared a simple meal from her pantry store's beans, cornbread, and the last of her preserved peaches. They ate at her kitchen table, the normalcy of the setting at odds with the extraordinary circumstances that had brought them together. "I need to check on your chickens," Kenton said as they finished eating. "See if any survived the storm." "The coop is gone," Madeline reminded him, her heart sinking at the thought of her small flock lost. "Chickens are tougher than they look," he replied with a wry smile, "and they have sense enough to find shelter in a storm." To her surprise and delight, he returned half an hour later with 5 of her 8 chickens, discovered sheltering beneath the overturned wagon near the garden. The birds were bedraggled and nervous but alive. Kenton helped her set up a temporary enclosure in the storage room off the kitchen, promising to build a new coop in the morning. As dusk fell, a new tension descended. Propriety demanded that Kenton leave return to town or to the Carter Ranch. Yet the roads remained hazardous, and darkness would make travel dangerous. "You should stay," Madeline said finally, breaking the silence as they sat on her small porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "It's not safe to travel those roads at night, especially after the storm." Kenton's gaze was steady. "That wouldn't be proper, Madeline. Your reputation, my reputation," she interrupted with unexpected vehemence, "is far less important than your safety." She softened her tone. "After what you did for me yesterday, I won't have you risking your neck on dangerous roads just to preserve appearances. You can use my father's room." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "If you're certain." "I am." That night, after Kenton had retired to her father's room and Madeline to her own, she lay awake listening to the unfamiliar sounds of another person moving about her home. It had been 2 years since she'd shared this space with anyone. The presence should have felt intrusive. Instead, it was oddly comforting. She thought about Kenton Stanton, the man she'd only known through town gossip and brief glimpses before yesterday. The stories painted him as dangerous, quick-tempered, a drifter with secrets. The man who had saved her from the cellar, who had shielded her body with his own against the tornado's fury, who had spent today helping repair her home, bore little resemblance to that portrait. Morning brought renewed activity. True to his word, Kenton began constructing a new chicken coop, using salvaged wood from the damaged barn. Madeline, her ankle feeling stronger, worked in the kitchen, baking bread and preparing food for the day. The domesticity of it struck her as both strange and pleasant. By midday, neighbors began to appear: the Williamsons from the next property over, the Henderson boys from down the valley, old Mrs. Abernathy and her grown son from the crossroads. All had come to check on Madeline after the storm, and all regarded Kenton with varying degrees of surprise and suspicion. Madeline explained the circumstances of his presence calmly but firmly, emphasizing his heroism during the tornado. Most accepted her account, though Mrs. Abernathy's pinched expression suggested the gossip would begin the moment she returned home. "People will talk," Kenton said quietly after the Hendersons had departed, leaving behind a promised return with more help tomorrow. "I should go." "Let them talk," Madeline replied, surprising herself with her indifference. "I know the truth, and so do you." He studied her face, seeming to search for something in her expression. "And what truth is that?" The question hung between them, laden with meaning beyond its simple words. Madeline found herself unable to look away from his gaze, her heart beating a rapid tattoo against her ribs. "That you are a good man, Kenton Stanton," she said finally. "Whatever else people may say." Something shifted in his expression, a softening, a vulnerability he hadn't shown before. "Not everyone would agree with that assessment. I don't care what everyone thinks." She stepped closer, emboldened by a certainty she couldn't quite explain. "I care what I know." The moment stretched between them, taut with unspoken feelings. Then Kenton cleared his throat and stepped back slightly. "I should finish that coup before dark." The next few days established a rhythm. Kenton arrived each morning at dawn, worked on the necessary repairs until dusk, then returned to his room at the Carter Ranch. Neighbors came and went, offering help with rebuilding and bringing food and supplies. The gossip Madeline had anticipated began circulating, but she found herself remarkably unconcerned with it. On the fourth day after the storm, Madeline was hanging laundry in the yard when Sheriff Jenkins rode up, his expression grave beneath his gray mustache. "Miss Russell," he greeted, tipping his hat. "Glad to see you weathered the storm." "Good morning, Sheriff," she replied, wiping her hands on her apron. "Yes, we were fortunate. The house sustained minimal damage." "So I see." His gaze swept the property, noting the newly constructed chicken coop and the repairs to the barn. "I understand Stanton's been helping you." There was a question in his statement, and Madeline met it directly. "Yes, he has. Mr. Stanton saved my life during the tornado, Sheriff. I was trapped in the old Thornfield root cellar. He pulled me out just before it collapsed." Jenkins nodded slowly. "That's so. Well, that's good to hear." He dismounted, tying his horse to the fence post. "Thing is, Miss Russell, I've had some concerns expressed about your situation. A single woman, alone out here with Stanton coming and going." Heat rose to Madeline's cheeks, though whether from embarrassment or anger, she couldn't quite tell. "Mr. Stanton has been a perfect gentleman, Sheriff. He's helping me rebuild after the storm, nothing more." "I'm sure that's true," Jenkins said, his tone suggesting he might believe otherwise. "But appearances matter, especially for a lady in your position." "Without family too, is there a law against accepting help from a neighbor after a disaster?" Madeline interrupted, her patience wearing thin. "No, madam, there is not," the sheriff sighed. "Just passing along the concerns of some of the town folk. Mrs. Abernathy was particularly vocal at yesterday's Ladies' Aid meeting." "I appreciate the concern," Madeline said stiffly, "but I assure you, it's unwarranted." Jenkins seemed about to say more when the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew their attention. Kenton rode into the yard, leading a second horse laden with lumber. His expression darkened slightly at the sight of the sheriff's horse. "Sheriff," he greeted cautiously as he dismounted. "Stanton." Jenkins nodded in acknowledgement. "Just checking on Miss Russell after the storm." "She's been managing well," Kenton said, his tone neutral. "Property's coming along." An awkward silence fell, broken finally by Madeline. "Sheriff Jenkins was just leaving, weren't you, Sheriff?" The lawman looked between them, then nodded slowly. "Suppose I was." "Miss Russell, remember what I said. Appearances matter in a small town." After he'd ridden away, Kenton turned to Madeline, his expression troubled. "What was that about?" she sighed, returning to her laundry. "Apparently Mrs. Abernathy and the Ladies' Aid Society have concerns about my virtue, given your presence here." A muscle tightened in Kenton's jaw. "I told you this would happen. And I told you I don't care." She pinned a sheet to the line with more force than necessary. "I will not apologize for accepting help when it's needed. Nor will I pretend to care about the opinions of people who would rather see me struggle alone than accept assistance from someone they've decided to disapprove of." Kenton's expression softened, and a small smile played at the corners of his mouth. "You're not what I expected, Madeline Russell. No, She paused in her work. And what did you expect? Someone more concerned with propriety, more willing to bow to the expectations of Placerville society. He stepped closer, taking the laundry pin from her fingers. Instead, you're quite possibly the most stubborn woman I've ever met. His proximity sent a flutter through her stomach. Is that a complaint, Mr. Stanton? Not at all. His voice had dropped lower, intimate in the space between them. It's quite possibly my favorite thing about you. The admission hung in the air between them, charged with meaning. Before Madeline could respond, Kenton stepped back, clearing his throat. I should unload that lumber. The barn roof won't fix itself. As he walked away, Madeline pressed a hand to her racing heart. Something was happening between them, something unexpected and potentially dangerous to her carefully ordered life. Yet she couldn't bring herself to regret it or to wish it away. Over the next week, the property gradually returned to normal. The barn was repaired, the garden replanted, the chicken coop completed and housing her recovered flock. Throughout it all, Kenton worked tirelessly, arriving each morning and leaving reluctantly each evening. Their conversations during meals and rest periods grew deeper, more personal. Madeline learned about Kenton's difficult relationship with his father, a stern man who had never understood his restless son. Kenton, in turn, listened as Madeline spoke of her dreams for the homestead, of the loneliness that sometimes threatened to overwhelm her, of her determination to maintain her independence in a world that expected women to depend on men. Have you never thought of marrying? He asked one evening as they sat on the porch, watching fireflies dance in the gathering darkness. Finding someone to share this place with, Madeline considered the question, watching the glowing insects blink in and out of existence. I've had offers, she admitted. Mr. Peterson from the Mercantile, Widow Johnson's son Thomas, even Sheriff Jenkins hinted at interest last Christmas. Yet you refused them all, Kenton observed. I did. She turned to look at him, her expression serious. I've seen too many women trapped in marriages of convenience or necessity. My mother loved my father deeply and he her. I want nothing less for myself. And you haven't found that. It wasn't a question. No. She hesitated, then added softly, at least, not until recently. The implication of her words hung in the air between them. Kenton's gaze searched her face, finding the truth in her expression. Slowly, deliberately, he reached out to take her hand. His palm was rough with calluses, warm against her skin. Madeline, he began, his voice low and serious. I'm not the man most people would choose for you. I've lived rough, moved often, I don't have much to my name. I don't care about that, she interrupted. You should, he insisted, because I care about what's best for you, and I'm not sure that's me. She tightened her grip on his hand. Shouldn't that be my decision? Before he could respond, the sound of approaching riders broke the moment. Kenton released her hand and stood, instinctively moving to position himself between Madeline and potential danger. 3 riders appeared in the fading light. Carter himself, owner of the ranch where Kenton worked, accompanied by his foreman and another ranch hand. Evening, Miss Russell, Carter called, tipping his hat as the men reined in their horses. Stanton. Mr. Carter, Madeline acknowledged, rising from her chair. This is unexpected. Apologize for the intrusion, the rancher said, though his tone suggested limited sincerity. Need to have a word with my employee here. Kenton stepped forward. Something wrong at the ranch. Carter's expression hardened. You might say that. Been 2 weeks since you've put in a full day's work, Stanton. Hired you to work my cattle, not play handyman for Miss Russell. I've been helping with storm damage, Kenton explained evenly. Miss Russell's property was hit hard. So were a dozen other places, Carter retorted, yet you're only concerned with this one. His gaze shifted to Madeline, then back to Kenton. Time to make a choice, Stanton. You're either working for me starting tomorrow at dawn or you're not working for me at all. Madeline stepped forward. Mr. Carter, surely you can understand, no disrespect intended, Miss Russell, Carter interrupted, but this is between me and my hand. He fixed Kenton with a hard stare. Well, what'll it be? Kenton's face revealed nothing of his thoughts. After a long moment, he spoke calmly. Then I reckon I'm not working for you anymore, Carter. The rancher's eyebrows rose in surprise, clearly not the response he'd expected. You're choosing to throw away steady employment. For what? For something that matters more, Kenton replied simply. Carter shook his head in disgust. Have it your way. Send someone for your things by tomorrow night or they'll be left outside the bunkhouse. He turned his horse. Let's go, boys. As the three riders departed, Madeline turned to Kenton in shock. You didn't have to do that. Your jobs are plentiful, he interrupted, his gaze never leaving hers. What's between us isn't. The admission stole her breath. And what exactly is between us, Kenton? He moved closer, his eyes reflecting the last golden light of sunset. Something I've never felt before. Something I'm not willing to walk away from. His hand rose to cup her cheek. Something worth risking everything for if you feel it too. Madeline leaned into his touch, her heart racing. I do, she whispered. I do feel it. His kiss, when it came, was gentle at first, a question rather than a demand. Madeline answered it by winding her arms around his neck, drawing him closer. The kiss deepened, becoming an expression of all the unspoken feelings that had grown between them since the moment he'd broken down the cellar door and carried her into the light. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Kenton rested his forehead against hers. What will the good ladies of Placerville think now? He murmured, a hint of humor in his voice. Madeline laughed softly. I find I care less and less with each passing day. The weeks that followed brought significant changes. Kenton moved into the small cabin at the edge of Madeline's property, previously used for storage. It was close enough for convenience, but separate enough to quiet some of the gossip that swirled through Placerville. He threw himself into improving the homestead, repairing fences, expanding the vegetable garden, and even building an irrigation system that brought water from the creek to ease Madeline's daily chores. For her part, Madeline found herself happier than she'd been since before her parents' deaths. The loneliness that had been her constant companion faded in the warmth of Kenton's presence. They worked side by side during the days and spent evenings on the porch talking, planning, and gradually falling deeper in love. Not everyone approved, of course. Mrs. Abernathy made a point of crossing to the other side of the street whenever Madeline appeared in town. Several of the church ladies whispered behind their hands during Sunday services. But others, like Mr. Gunderson at the Mercantile and the Williamson family, accepted the relationship with good grace, particularly after witnessing how Kenton's presence had revitalized both Madeline and her property. One evening in late summer, as they sat on the porch watching a spectacular sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Kenton reached for Madeline's hand. I've been thinking, he began, uncharacteristically hesitant. A dangerous pastime, she teased gently. He smiled, but his eyes remained serious. I've never stayed in one place this long before, never wanted to, always felt the need to move on, see what was over the next horizon. Madeline's heart constricted with sudden fear. And now, do you feel that need again? No. His grip on her hand tightened reassuringly. Just the opposite. For the first time in my life, I can't imagine being anywhere else. He turned to face her fully. I love you, Madeline Russell. I want to build a life with you right here if you'll have me. Joy bloomed in her chest, bright and overwhelming. Are you proposing, Kenton Stanton? Inelegantly, perhaps, he admitted with a self-deprecating smile. "But yes, will you marry me, Madeline?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "Yes, I will." His kiss was tender and full of promise. When they parted, his eyes held a spark of mischief. "What will the Ladies' Aid Society say now?" Madeline laughed, her happiness too complete to be diminished by thoughts of gossip. "They'll say I've made a scandalous choice, and they'll be right." Her expression softened. "But it's my choice. The right one." They were married 2 weeks later in a small ceremony in the meadow behind the house. Reverend Walsh officiated, having come around to acceptance after several long conversations with the couple. The Williamsons attended, along with Mr. Gunderson, Sheriff Jenkins, who had grudgingly admitted Kenton's positive influence on the property, and a few others who had supported their relationship. Even Carter came, having seemingly forgiven Kenton's departure in light of his obvious happiness. As autumn approached, they settled into married life with a contentment neither had expected to find. Kenton proved to be a natural farmer, his years of working with animals and land serving him well as he expanded their operations. Madeline, freed from the constant struggle of managing alone, found time to pursue her love of reading and even began teaching the Williamson children 3 afternoons a week. Their first test came with the arrival of early winter storms. Heavy rains turned the roads to mud, followed by an unusual cold snap that threatened their expanded chicken flock and the 2 milk cows Kenton had purchased. Together, they worked to protect their animals, reinforcing the barn against the wind and creating a system to keep water from freezing in the troughs. During one particularly fierce storm, as they sat before the fire in their snug parlor, Madeline was reminded of the tornado that had brought them together. "You ever think about that day?" she asked, her head resting against Kenton's shoulder. "If the storm hadn't come, if you hadn't followed me, I'd have found my way to you eventually," he said with quiet certainty. "Some things are meant to be." Madeline smiled at this unexpected romanticism from her practical husband. "I never thought I'd hear Kenton Stanton speak of destiny." He chuckled, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You've changed me in many ways, Mrs. Stanton." His hand came to rest gently on her stomach, where the first subtle signs of their child's presence were beginning to show. All for the better. The news of Madeline's pregnancy had transformed them both. Kenton became even more protective, insisting on handling the heavier chores and fretting over her smallest discomfort. Madeline found herself planning for a future that now included not just the 2 of them but a child, their child. It seemed miraculous, this new life growing within her, a tangible symbol of their love. Spring arrived with renewed vigor, the land awakening from winter's grip. The homestead flourished under their combined care, fields planted with corn and wheat. The garden expanded to include medicinal herbs as well as vegetables, fruit trees beginning to bud. They had added to their livestock as well, now keeping a small herd of cattle in addition to the chickens and milk cows. On a perfect May morning, with wildflowers dotting the meadow and birds singing in the trees, Madeline gave birth to their son. They named him James, after Kenton's brother, with Thomas as a middle name to honor Madeline's father. He had his mother's auburn hair and his father's startlingly blue eyes, and from his first lusty cry, he held both their hearts completely in his tiny hands. "He's perfect," Kenton whispered, cradling his son with a tenderness that brought tears to Madeline's eyes. "Just like his mother." "I think he has your spirit," she observed, watching as the infant gripped his father's finger with surprising strength. "Strong, determined." "God help us all," Kenton laughed softly. Life settled into a new rhythm centered around little James. Kenton proved to be a devoted father, as comfortable changing diapers and walking a fussing infant as he was breaking horses or mending fences. Madeline watched their bond grow with joy, seeing in her husband's gentle care of their son the man she'd always known lay beneath his rough exterior. As James grew from infant to toddler, curious and adventurous, the homestead continued to prosper. Kenton's management had increased their yields considerably, allowing them to sell surplus crops and save toward purchasing neighboring land when it became available. The once struggling Russell property had transformed into one of the most productive farms in the area. With prosperity came a gradual shift in the community's perception. Those who had once whispered behind their hands now came to the Stanton farm for advice on crop rotation or animal husbandry. Even Mrs. Abernathy eventually thawed, particularly after Kenton fixed her leaking roof following another severe storm. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching 3-year-old James chase fireflies across the yard, Madeline reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. "Do you remember what you said to me that day in the cellar?" she asked, her hand entwined with Kenton's. "When you broke down the door," he smiled, the memory clear despite the years that had passed. "I believe I told you to keep your head down. Not very romantic." "No," she agreed with a laugh. "But you brought me into the light just the same." Her expression grew thoughtful. "In more ways than one." Kenton lifted their joined hands, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "You did the same for me, Madeline. I was drifting before I found you, moving from place to place without purpose. You gave me a home, a family. We gave each other what we needed most," she said softly. Their moment of reflection was interrupted by James, who came running up the porch steps, his small face alight with excitement. "Papa, I caught one," he announced proudly, cupping his hands around a glowing firefly. "So you did." Kenton scooped up his son, settling him on his knee. "Remember what we said about letting them go?" James nodded solemnly, then carefully opened his hands. The firefly hesitated for a moment before taking flight, its light blinking as it rose into the gathering darkness. "Bye-bye, firefly," he called after it. Madeline's heart swelled with love for her small family. 5 years had passed since the tornado that had changed her life, bringing destruction but also delivering Kenton to her door. In that time, they had built something precious together, not just a prosperous farm, but a home filled with love and laughter. As darkness fell completely, they moved inside, Kenton carrying a sleepy James to his bed while Madeline lit the lamps against the night. Later, as they lay together in the quiet of their bedroom, she rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I have news," she said quietly. Kenton's hand, which had been stroking her hair, paused. "What kind of news?" She raised herself on one elbow to look into his face, illuminated by the soft glow of moonlight through the window. "James will have a brother or sister come winter." Joy transformed his features. "Truly," he whispered, his hand moving to rest gently on her still flat stomach. "Truly," she confirmed, covering his hand with her own. He pulled her close, his kiss conveying all the emotions words couldn't express. When they parted, his eyes shone with unshed tears. "I never imagined I could be this happy," he confessed. "Never thought I deserved it." "You deserve every happiness," Madeline assured him fiercely. "And I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure you know it." Winter brought their daughter, Elizabeth Rose Stanton, born during a gentle snowfall that blanketed the valley in pristine white. She had her father's dark hair and her mother's delicate features, and from the moment she entered the world, she was adored not only by her parents but by her big brother, who appointed himself her special protector. The years flowed one into the next, marked by the changing seasons, the growth of their children, and the continued prosperity of their farm. James grew into a tall, thoughtful boy with his father's way with animals and his mother's love of books. Elizabeth, or Libby as everyone called her, was spirited and determined, equally at home helping with the chores or creating elaborate stories to entertain her dolls. By the time James was 10 and Libby 7, the Stanton farm had doubled in size, incorporating the old Peterson place when the elderly couple decided to move east to live with their daughter. They employed several hands during planting and harvest seasons, and had built a reputation for fair dealings and quality produce. Kenton, once the subject of suspicion and gossip, was now a respected member of the community, serving on the school board and occasionally as deputy when Sheriff Jenkins needed assistance. The restlessness that had driven him for so many years had been channeled into constant improvements to their land and home, into teaching his children to ride and farm, into creating a legacy that would endure. Madeline, too, had found her place. She taught reading at the school 2 days a week, helped organize community events, and still found time to maintain her beloved garden. The lonely young woman who had struggled to maintain her independence had blossomed into a confident, contented wife and mother, secure in her husband's love and their shared life. On their 15th anniversary, Kenton surprised Madeline with a gift he'd been working on in secret for months, a gazebo built in the meadow where wildflowers bloomed each spring, where they had been married, where their children loved to play. Made of carefully planed wood with a shingled roof and delicate latticework, it was both practical and beautiful. "For you," he said simply, leading her to it with her eyes closed. "A place to read, to watch the children, to remember." When she opened her eyes, tears of joy filled them. "It's perfect," she whispered, turning to embrace him. "Thank you." They stood together in the afternoon sunlight, arms around each other, watching as James taught Libby how to fly the kite Kenton had made for his birthday. In the distance, their farmhouse stood solid and welcoming, smoke curling from the chimney, windows gleaming in the sun. "Did you ever imagine this?" Madeline asked softly. "That day when you broke down the cellar door and found me," Kenton smiled, his arm tightening around her waist. "Never in my wildest dreams, but I knew even then that you were someone special, someone worth staying for. And here we are," she said, leaning her head against his shoulder. "All because of a tornado." "No," he corrected gently. "All because two people found each other when they needed it most. The storm was just the beginning." As if to underscore his words, a warm breeze swept across the meadow, carrying the scent of wildflowers and the sound of their children's laughter. Madeline closed her eyes, savoring the moment and the journey that had brought them here, from darkness to light, from isolation to connection, from strangers to a family bound by love that grew stronger with each passing day. The tornado that had threatened to destroy her life had instead delivered her greatest blessing, a man brave enough to break down doors, gentle enough to heal her heart, and steadfast enough to build a life beside her, come what may. In the shelter of his arms, Madeline had found not just safety, but joy beyond measure. And as the years continued to pass, their love remained as constant as the changing seasons, as enduring as the land they tended together, a love born in the fury of a storm, but destined to flourish in the light of countless peaceful days.